What a week! Super Heavy Booster 14 and Starship 33 lifted off at 4:37 local time on Thursday, and now Flight 7 is in the history books. From booster catch to ship problems to all the regulatory and hardware steps that now follow, there's a lot to unpack here. So sit back, strap in, and let's try and wrap our heads around exactly what just happened. I'm Beyer for NSF, and this is your Starbase Update. Before we get to the flight, we have to look at three different pieces of hardware. One test article, one vehicle that already flew, and one that is about to fly on the 8th mission of Starship. The test article is, or was, the Beil 14.1 test tank that had been used for catch testing. It was moved inside the high bay and scrapped. The vehicle that already flew is of course Booster 12, which launched and was the first Super Heavy booster to ever be caught on October 13th of last year. Since then, Booster 12 has been stored in the rocket garden at the Sanchez lot. However, it was moved inside Mega Bay 1 on the same day the Booster 14.1 test article went into the high bay for scrapping. And that made us all nervous because, well, SN15. Turns out, it was all just for a quick stand swap and there was no cause for concern. You see, SpaceX iterates their GSE, or ground support equipment, just like they iterate their rockets. The Booster 14.1 test tank was on an old version of the booster transport stand, and Booster 12 was on a newer, modern transport stand. By scrapping Booster 14.1, they freed up an old obsolete stand for Booster 12 to live on, and in turn freed up a booster transport stand that can now be used in the production of another booster. With that replacement done, Booster 12 was moved back to the rocket garden, and we all breathed a huge sigh of relief. It is a little bittersweet though. While this means that Booster 12 is safe, at least for now, it would also seem to indicate that SpaceX does not have any current plans to refly Booster 12, so hopefully it'll be sticking around in the rocket garden for years to come. You know the drill. We'll keep our eyes on everything that goes on at the production site and rocket garden and keep you updated as usual when anything of note happens. Finally, the vehicle that's about to fly, and that is Ship 34, which we currently expect to be used on Flight 8. In the coming weeks, Ship 34 is going to be tested, worked on, get engines, and then get tested some more. In the first part of this process, to get it ready for launch, it left Mega Bay 2 without any Raptor engines installed to start cryoproof testing at the Massey outpost. As a refresher, cryoproof testing is basically just pressure testing the tankage on a ship or booster to ensure that it can stand up to flight pressures, temperatures, and everything else. SpaceX has been known to proof test vehicles both with ambient temperature gas, also known as a pneumatic proof test, and with inert cryogenic liquids like nitrogen or oxygen, which is why we call it a cryoproof. You really want to be sure your giant steel balloon can hold pressure at the super cold temperatures it will be subjected to by its propellants before launching it into space or the Indian Ocean or whatever. The reason SpaceX uses cryogens, if it isn't obvious, is because if something were to go wrong during a test and a leak developed, well, you really don't want methane and oxygen mixing when they shouldn't be. Subtle foreshadowing for later. Ship 34 made a trip over to Massey's on January 15th, the day before Flight 7, which, yes, we are going to talk about at length here in just a moment. Now, something that seasoned tank watchers out there might recognize is the particular stand Ship 34 was rolled out on. Yes, we're talking about GSE again. It's important. This is what we call the thrust simulator stand, and it uses large hydraulic rams to simulate the thrust of Raptor engines during flight, while the vehicle is being subjected to the temperatures and pressures I mentioned a moment ago. This, among other things, is a dead giveaway that Ship 34 does not have engines yet because the hydraulic rams fit in their place, and thus it lets us know that the vehicle is not yet ready for static fire testing. After all, there's a separate stand for that. Ship 34 is the second Block 2 version 2 design of Starship to be built. Its future very much depends on what exactly happened with Ship 33 and how it performed in flight. As of the time of this recording, we don't yet know what caused Ship 33's RUD, and we might just have to wait for the investigation's results to be released. However it shakes out, there almost certainly will be some modifications and upgrades needed on Ship 34 based on the data gathered on Flight 7. Over the course of Friday, Ship 34 was cryotested for several hours at SpaceX's Massey outpost. We could see the ship getting frosty and holding propellant for quite a significant amount of time. So it seems that SpaceX is not slowing down with the testing flow for this ship anytime soon. In fact, as I record this, the road to the Massey outpost is closed and Ship 34 is being cryotested a second time. Next up for this ship, should there not be any need to work out a major issue, is the rollback to the production site where it will receive its engines. Then it will be rolled back to Massey's on the static fire stand and static fired. After that, it's just final work and finishing touches, and it's ready for flight. As usual, Ship 34 probably features hundreds of upgrades versus the previous prototype, so it remains to be seen what SpaceX will need to fix or tweak on Ship 34. Okay, now let's talk about Starship Flight 7's launch, landing, and RUD. Going into the week, we had confirmation that SpaceX was going to launch, and spoiler, they launched. So let's get you up to speed on everything that happened in the lead up to Starship flying yet again. In the days before launch, SpaceX was dealing with seriously iffy weather that did not stop them from conducting some pre-flight checkouts over the week. The Chopsticks checked out their flight position in the early morning, as we can see here. They're moving up to the top of the tower and opening wide in the standard catch position. This is the position they hold before liftoff, before they perform a quick wiggle check while the booster is in the air. Once that's successful, they then prepare to catch the booster. Another checkout that was performed was an igniter test. These are basically not visible, but you can sure hear them. And you can always identify if it's a ship or a booster igniter test by the fact that it's either 2 or 3 sounds. The ship ignites its vacuum and sea level Raptors in 2 phases, while the booster ignites all of its engines in a 3-stage ignition. We hear the sound here is 2 sounds, so it was a ship igniter test on Ship 33. Once all this testing was completed, the Chopsticks closed again and went back into their stable configuration. But wait, for no extra free, we'll even throw in some more Chopsticks movement. Just play shipping and handling. Call now, operators are standing by. Sorry, I don't know what came over me. On launch day, the Chops opened once again and moved into launch position. One other critical task performed by SpaceX in the run-up to liftoff is removing the non-critical hardware and equipment from the launch site. Here you can see a bunch of SPMTs and counterweights that were previously used in vehicle transport or crane transport leaving the launch site. There is nothing unusual here though. A lot of the more expensive equipment is not stored next to the vehicle during launch, since that would be a really quick way to roast a bunch of money. 2 nights before the first launch attempt, which was at this point still scheduled for Wednesday the 15th, we also saw Ship 33's transport stand leave the launch site. Since Ship 33 no longer needed it, it will now be repurposed as a stand for an upcoming ship. Another important piece of equipment that had to be protected before launch was one of the LR-11,000 cranes at the launch site, currently in use to construct the second Starship launch pad in Starbase. The crane was lowered to protect it from any overpressure events, and the heat and force from Super Heavy's 33 Raptor engines. Then came Flight Day Attempt 1. And the weather was miserable. Like, seriously, the visibility was garbage. It was raining and overcast, and overall, it did not seem like a really good day to fly Starship. We couldn't even see the top of the ship or the tower most of the time. We were really hoping SpaceX wouldn't go for a launch attempt in such bad conditions. It would have been SN11 all over again. That said, all we could do was hope for the best and prepare for the worst and continue setting up cameras. Mercifully, while initial pad clear preparations were conducted, but before the tank farm or roadblocks kicked into gear, SpaceX confirmed that they were no longer targeting Wednesday for the 7th flight of Starship, stating, quote, "Due to weather, we're now targeting Thursday, January 16th for Starship's 7th flight test. The 60-minute launch window opens at 4 p.m. Central Time," end quote. It takes some time to replenish the massive tank farm, so if odds are against you on a certain day, it's sometimes the right call to not go into the count, but stop and instead try again on a better day. Also, since we're trying to capture imagery of this thing flying, we really appreciate it, SpaceX, and Mother Nature for that matter. So how to use all that extra time? Well, here at NSF, we use the time to double check things and deploy as much gear as possible. What did SpaceX do? How about a test of the detonation suppression system, which is used to disturb the air below the pad and prevent the creation of explosive methane and oxygen mixtures? That system was tested on the early morning of Thursday before final preparations for the launch attempt started. SpaceX then ran through the usual process that we've been seeing from the past few flights. Of course, this is not exactly the same flow as the last time, as it features several improvements to tanking time and other factors, and also the modified Block 2 ship. But overall, it looked like a smooth countdown. While the window opened at 4 p.m., SpaceX confirmed the launch time was later adjusted to 4:37 p.m. local time. It's unclear what exactly caused this delay, but it was probably something minor, like adjusting for the right weather. With that, they just barely missed a potential ISS pass right as the window would have been opened. Sure would have been nice to get some Don Pettit photos of it, but what can you do? Of course, not a main consideration of SpaceX, but it would have been pretty cool. With all the puzzle pieces in place, it was go time. Booster 14 and Ship 33 took flight as planned with the ignition of 33 healthy Raptor engines. The booster and ship then started to clear successfully through max Q, became supersonic, and reached stage separation. And then, of course, hot staging. This is, however, where things started to go wrong for the ship. But for the moment, let's stay with the booster. On the boost back burn, out of 13 planned engines, 12 ignited. While not optimal, this was not enough to stop any potential catch attempt, and the flight director for SpaceX still confirmed a go for catch after the ground system communication behaved this time. And a catch it was indeed. Coming in with a thrust-to-weight ratio of about 4, Booster 14 hit the brakes late, and we saw another successful catch of a super heavy booster. Welcome home, Booster 14. In a very impressive twist, the Raptor engine that was shut down on the boost back burn was able to relight for the first phase of the landing burn. I say impressive because attempting to reignite a potentially faulty engine after problems in flight implies deep knowledge of the Raptor engine's capabilities and behaviors in a variety of situations, as well as onboard software that can choose to reignite an engine that had a non-critical issue. In a lot of ways, this isn't surprising, given all the testing we see going on at SpaceX's McGregor, Texas engine testing facility. Shout out to our 24/7 McGregor live stream. This also marks the first reflight of a Raptor engine, the Raptor R314. This could be the first time Starship hardware has been reused for a flight, at least that we're aware of publicly. It's an amazing achievement for the Starship teams, and before people wonder, the Raptor, the reused one, is on the outer ring. Only the inner 2 rings of engines ignite for the boost back and landing burns, so no, it was not the one misbehaving during the boost back burn. Now, let's move our attention to the ship. Alas, here things did not go so well. Shortly before 8 minutes into flight, one of the Raptor engines on the ship, a sea-level engine, went out. At this point, we can also see flames on the hull of Ship 33, as it seems there was some sort of fire already ongoing. While flames can appear on a vehicle right then, the outer body and hull of the vehicle, where some of the vents are for the engine section, are not exactly a great place to have a fire. A second and third engine went out 8 minutes into flight, and at this point it became very clear that something was very wrong with Ship 33. The methane levels also started to drop very quickly on the ship, and with a fire present, a leak somewhere on the vehicle became a very likely scenario. At 8 minutes and 27 seconds, we received the last update on telemetry from Ship 33, and the numbers on the screen from SpaceX stopped moving. What we know now, from footage that has been sent to us by several sources on X, thanks you guys for that by the way, is the beginning of Ship 33 completely losing control and potentially the FTS even terminating the ship. Over the Turks and Caicos, people saw streaks of lights and a unique jellyfish that, while beautiful, we really don't want to ever see. Ship 33 parts were re-entering the atmosphere while illuminated by the sun. Clearly, the ship had exploded. The parts that were observable showed 3 major pieces that then broke into smaller and smaller pieces over time. While SpaceX had lost communication with the ship, it is absolutely possible that this was the flight termination system firing, as that system also activates if the computer itself sees something wrong with the vehicle. It could be that the FTS activated after the engines shut down early. Or it could be something totally different, like a leak on a Raptor engine caused a whole bunch of pressure to blow up the whole dang end of the ship. I don't know. We'll find out when the FAA releases the investigation. SpaceX's statement about this follows. Quote, Starship experienced a rapid, unscheduled disassembly during its ascent burn. Teams will continue to review data from today's flight test to better understand root cause. With a test like this, success comes from what we learn, and today's flight will help us improve Starship's reliability. End quote. Now remember, this flight had ambitious goals. The ship had fully redesigned forward flaps, new avionics, and updated transfer tubes to deliver methane to its Raptor engines. It also featured a complete electrical update, and overall was the result of all of the lessons learned from Starship Block 1. So some issues are to be expected and are forgivable. To me though, this is a bit disappointing. The fire had to start somewhere, and a leak in the fuel system or a leak on a Raptor itself could be why the ship failed. This is very similar to other failures of Starship, where a fire on board the vehicle took out multiple systems to terminate the flight. Elon Musk said on X about this flight, quote, "The booster flight was a success. The ship flight was 1/4 successful, hence the cup being about 5/8 full. New ship forward flaps, higher thrust engines, and tile adherence on ascent were tested," end quote. That of course makes sense. We saw movement of the ship's forward flaps during ascent, and we can also imagine that SpaceX got some pretty good data about the stability of the tiles during the violent ascent of the booster and ship. Elon goes on further, quote, "Improved heat shield performance was the only major thing that wasn't tested, along with the PEZ payload dispenser. So the only major thing plus another major thing. Probably solved in next month's launch. The 9-meter diameter version of Starship will probably fly about 10,000 times. So this is barely a bump in the road. Doesn't change the likely date at which Mars becomes self-sufficient. End quote. There was some editorializing in there by me, but you figure it out, you can read. The heat shield performance, of course, couldn't be tested. The ship never reached re-entry. Same goes for the payload, of course. But the rest of the statement is very interesting. Elon is still saying that next month's launch is possible. That seems incredibly ambitious, given the problems on this flight. Ship 34 is being cryo tested over the weekend, so maybe in like 6 to 8 weeks from now, we'll see another Starship fly. Maybe. That would certainly be incredible. In a further X post, Elon details what might be the cause of the issue. Quote, preliminary indication is that we had an oxygen fuel leak in the cavity above the ship engine firewall that was large enough to build pressure in excess of the vent capacity, end quote. Remember, the transfer tubes and part of the fuel delivery system to the Raptor engines has been redesigned. So maybe part of the redesign resulted in that leak. Then that built up behind the Raptor engines in the thrust section and at some point resulted in too much pressure and fire for the ship to handle. It could also have been something totally different, like a leak on a Raptor engine itself somewhere. After all, one of Ship 33's RVACs was the cursed Raptor that got hit by a drone while being towed by a Cybertruck down Highway 4. I kid. Elon then goes on and talks about a potential fix. Quote, apart from obviously double checking for leaks, we will add fire suppression to that volume and probably increase vent area. Nothing so far suggests pushing next launch past next month. End quote. Ignoring the leak checking part, the second part is very similar to what they did on the booster. Using CO2 purges, they have been fighting fires in the engine section since Flight 1. This has been working on the booster with good success, so while it does not fully fix the issue, it at least might let them fly again before finding all the leaks. SpaceX, on a blog post on their website, seems to confirm the words of Elon here, saying, quote, initial data indicates a fire developed in the aft section of the ship, leading to a rapid, unscheduled disassembly. This all means that we might see another opening of the tanks for Ship 34, which could result in another cryo test. We'll have to see. The engines aren't installed yet, as we said earlier, and neither are the aft flaps, so SpaceX still has quite some work to do on that ship anyway. But February really seems like a very aggressive timeline that Elon is presenting here. We'll have to see if SpaceX can hit it. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you don't bet against SpaceX. And there's even more news. Yes, even more news. The first statement that was issued by the FAA, or the Federal Aviation Administration, came right after flight. Here, the FAA confirmed that they had to divert flight paths of a few aircraft. Quote, the FAA briefly slowed and diverted aircraft around the area where space vehicle debris was falling. Normal operations have resumed. A debris response area is activated only if the space vehicle experiences an anomaly with debris falling outside of the identified closed aircraft hazard areas. It allows the FAA to direct aircraft to exit the area and prevent others from entering. End quote. This is a little concerning. SpaceX and the FAA, of course, did calculations on the potential debris area for Starship, and no aircraft should be even near that. So that they had to change flight paths for vehicles shows that there might be some miscalculations in the previous analysis. SpaceX, however, does not agree with this statement. They say on their website, quote, Starship flew within its designated launch corridor, as all US launches do, to safeguard the public, both on the ground, on water, and in the air. Any surviving pieces of debris would have fallen into the designated hazard area, end quote. So who's right? The FAA or SpaceX? That will be properly investigated in the SpaceX-led mishap investigation that the FAA announced a day after. This had been coming since a RUD in this phase of flight is not exempted from that. So this meant that the moment a RUD happened, it was already quite clear that it would get an investigation. But of course, the main part of such an investigation is the question, was the safety of the public ever in danger? And this will be in strong relation to planes having to adjust their flight paths to avoid debris. Was this just a move of caution and not actually needed? We'll probably find out once the mishap report is out. In the activation of the mishap investigation, say that 3 times fast, the FAA also confirming that this flight resulted in no reports of public injury or public safety, and SpaceX is working with the FAA and appropriate authorities to confirm reports of public property damage in the Turks and Caicos area. We'll have to wait and see what comes out of this. It will also be interesting to find out what the exact flight profile will be for the next launch. Any catch attempt of Ship 34 on Flight 8 is likely now out of the question, and we'll probably see something that is very close to the flight profile of Flight 7 with some modifications. Will we see the re-entry tile test in the same shape or form again? Sadly, they did not get to test that. So I think personally, another test flight of the same profile is likely. They wanted that data for a reason. Now, let's focus our attention on the very successful part of this mission, Booster 14. This heroic booster was placed on the orbital launch mount after catch, where it was connected to the booster QD. Ryan Caton actually measured the time it took them to fully connect the booster this time, versus last time. And spoiler, they are getting a lot faster. The BQD then helped perform the final detanking before Booster 14 was then, late in the evening, removed from the orbital launch mount and placed on its transport stand. Getting a good look at Booster 14, it seems that there was no damage to the chines this time, and really no obvious signs of damage at all. Booster 14 looked to be in great shape. Maybe even good enough for reuse? We'll see. The senior director of SpaceX for build reliability and QA, that's quality assurance, on the SpaceX LinkedIn, hinted that this one might be for reuse. At the end of a statement about flight, he said, quote, "Looking forward to seeing that booster cleaned up and reused. Maybe," end quote. So you're telling me there's a chance? Wait, wrong rocket, sorry. The one place where you can always see the scars of flight is the forward section of the booster. Here, you can see the burn marks from the hot staging maneuver, where the second stage engines hit the booster. But after all, Falcon 9 gets sooty, so this might just be how a flight-proven Super Heavy looks. Finally, on the night of the 17th, Booster 14 rolled back to the Mega Bay for inspections. We'll have to wait and see if SpaceX decides to do any kind of testing with Booster 14. But for now, gathering all the data they can from it while it's inside the Mega Bay is probably their highest priority. With Flight 7 over and done with, it was game time in Boca once again. The Buckner LR-11000 crane was erected to its full height once again, and work resumed continuing on Pad B. This will be another one of our big watch items in the coming weeks, until Flight 8 at least, as SpaceX will surely want to get as much done as possible on this second launch pad while they have the time. Speaking of, after being taken down a few days ago, they also reassembled the chopsticks assembly jig again. Yes, that is the one they will use to prepare the chopsticks for installation on the tower. At this point, it's almost sure that they'll have a second tower with chopsticks for Flight 8. And guess what? The chopsticks carriage system was rolled out to Tower 2 overnight, right after Booster 14 rolled back to the production site. So it seems like installation of that system is very much starting to happen right now. You can, of course, stay up to date with everything going on by keeping an eye on Starbase Live. And to be fair, this has been coming, as SpaceX has started to install the skates for the chopsticks in the last few weeks. What do you think? When Flight 8? Until we reach that point, they need to modify Ship 34 to whatever they think is necessary after this flight. Test it, test Booster 15 if that is indeed the next one to fly, then roll them out for integrated testing. That's quite a list. We'll see what they end up doing. Until then, thanks for watching, and don't forget, be excellent to each other.
I'm Jack Beyer, and this is your Starbase Update.
All right, I'm ready to record. What are you doing?
Oh!
Stop it!